Good morning. How's everybody doing today? Hope you enjoyed all of yesterday's content. I hope you made some uncommon connections. How many of you have seen your hello buddy since yesterday? That's not a lot of us. I saw mine walk in about 30 seconds ago. He's sitting in one of the really middle tables. So, hey, hello, buddy. Before we get started with Apra Talks this morning, I'd like to show you a video that helps recognize our award winners. So I'm going to step off to the side and play that, and then we'll get moving.
Hi, my name is Lauren Woodring. I'm the Director of Prospect Research and Management at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, as well as the President of Apra, Pennsylvania. I'm so honored to accept the 2022 Apra Scholarship Award. I never thought I would go into fundraising, but like many of you, I stumbled into prospect research and fell in love with it. I've been fortunate to work in 2 arts organizations in Philadelphia and love being able to contribute to the arts in such a meaningful way. This award means so much to me because Apra has been so important to my career. The arts world was particularly hard hit by COVID, and many organizations, including mine, are not able to offer the same professional development experiences as before. The scholarship will allow me to attend Apra PD, and I'm so excited to meet new friends, learn from each other, and come back ready to strengthen my museum and my Apra chapter. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing so many of you in Atlanta.
Hi, my name is Courtney Duckworth, and I'm Senior Director of Prospect Development and Donor Engagement with Alsac St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee. I am overwhelmed with gratitude to receive the APRA 2022 Professional of the Year Award, and I'm so honored to have my work recognized in this way. However, I can't take credit for this award independently because it wouldn't have been possible without my team and colleagues. This past year has been a time of uncertainty, change, and growth for all of us, and I have been so proud of my team for their steadfast dedication to the St. Jude mission and for working tirelessly to provide prospect development support, build new relationships, and implement data driven strategies to boost fundraising efforts. I have to also directly call out my prospect development team leaders, Rachel Olney and Janice Clark, because their leadership and expertise is vital to all we have achieved in the last few years. I also want to thank my leadership, Connie Mott and Regina Watson, who have empowered me to build strategies and make the best decisions on prospect development solutions, tools, and processes to meet our goals. When I started my career in prospect development in 2002, I never dreamed how far it would take me or all the doors it would open for me to grow and evolve in my career. I am so thankful to APRA and the prospect development community for continuously pushing professional development, helping align our industry around best practices, and offering a forum of professional connection and engagement. Thank you again for this honor.
Hello, my name is Dina Zalecki, and I'm Director of Research and Prospect Management at Harvard University. It is my honor to have been chosen for this year's Margaret Fury Award, which talks about mentorship and leadership and service to the community. And the truth of the matter is that anything that I have done in this regard is just paying it forward for the many people that I have learned from. This community is so smart and so generous with time and knowledge and sharing. And I just couldn't be prouder to be in this career and among you professionals. So thank you very much for honoring me in this way.
Hi, my name is Lori Hood Lawson, and I'm the former Vice President for Advancement Insights for UC Innovation, where I continue to serve as an advisor to Ascend AI. I recently joined Call Simulator and serve as its Chief Experience Officer. I first started in prospect development in 1998 at the Florida State University Foundation as a prospect research analyst, and I served as its Associate Director of Prospect Research when I left in 2003 to join a company called Prospect Information Network, also known as PEN. I am this year's humble recipient of APRA's Distinguished Service Award. In my nearly 25 years in prospect development, I've served as a mentor for fellow PD professionals and on numerous committees at both the chapter and international level. But the one involvement for which I am most proud is my work with the Ethics and Compliance Committee. It's been through these years of involvement that I've made so many lifelong friends, including the love of my life, my husband, David Lawson. It's been both an honor and a pleasure to work with you all, alongside you all, and for you all through all facets of prospect development. And I encourage each of you to become more involved in all the ways that you can. To the Apra Awards Committee and to those who nominated me for this incredible honor, thank you so much. It absolutely means the world to me.
One more time, let's give a really warm congratulatory for our winners, Lauren, Courtney, Dina, and Lori. So I have 3 reminders and 1 invitation for you, and then we will introduce Apra Talks for the year. First reminder is if you haven't already downloaded the conference app, I highly encourage you to do that. It will help you plan out your schedule, meet with each other, see photos of the event, but it's also a good primer because the Q&A portion of Apra Talks will utilize the app as well. I would also ask that you take a few moments to fill out the session evaluations for all of the sessions that you are attending. We really do use those evaluations to shape future programming, and it's your feedback that will help us revise things that aren't working, dig in deeper to things that are working, and make sure that this is as good of an experience as it possibly can be for you. And your final reminder is to join us on social media. Apra PD is 3 days long, but Apra lasts 365 days a year. So you can join us on Facebook, you can join us on LinkedIn or on Twitter, and please be sure to also check out our Apra Bites on the YouTube channel. My invitation for you is this. Please make this if it's your first time here, please make this your first annual trip to Apra PD. And if this is not your first time here, please continue to join us. Next year, we will be in Indianapolis from August 28th through August 31st. And I invite all of you back together again and with your colleagues as well. So with no further ado, we're going to move on to Apra Talks, one of the events that from your feedback in past years we know is one of the most highly sought after events each year of PD. I would like to introduce our 2 co-hosts for today, Becky Fulmer, who color coordinated with me, you'll see that in a moment, and Stephanie Brower, who is actually going to be next year's conference chair, as well as your Apra Talks panel. Please join me on stage.
Good morning. I am Becky Fulmer from the University of Central Florida.
I'm Stephanie Brower from Creative Fundraising Advisors.
And we are your Apra Talks co-hosts. Before we jump in this morning, I do want to cover a couple of quick housekeeping items. First, we absolutely want to recognize our colleague, Andrea Holland. She had served as a co-chair for Apra Talks up until a few weeks ago. Had the opportunity to join another organization and couldn't be here with us, but we absolutely recognize and honor their contribution to our discussion today. I also want to repeat what Melissa said. The Q&A section at the end of Apra Talks today will utilize the Slido app, which is in the conference app. Just pop into the Apra Talks session, and the link will be at the top. And finally, we want to say hello to our virtual audience today and welcome them to Apra Talks as well. So I can remember my very first Apra Talks being exactly where you are today, not really knowing what to expect out of it, but loving every minute of it. And I have been a huge fan ever since. Apra Talks features really smart people talking about really compelling issues and weaving in their personal journeys and perspectives to that. But what I love the most about this is it invites us to maybe think differently about something, and today's topics will be no different. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus is credited with the idea that change is the only constant. And over the last couple of years, I think change has been more than a constant for all of us. It can be unsettling, it can bring uncertainty, but it can also bring tremendous opportunity. And that will be the theme of today's conversation. This talk will feature perspectives from beyond prospect development to help us think about the broader philanthropic landscape, the changes that are out there, and how we might navigate them. And now I'll turn it over to Stephanie to introduce our speakers.
Who wants to meet our speakers? Yes. Wonderful. First, I am delighted to introduce Colton Strasser. Dr. Strasser completed his doctorate in nonprofit and philanthropic leadership at the Nonprofit Institute at the University of San Diego and is a certified fundraising executive, AFP master trainer, certified nonprofit professional, and certified facilitator of the Core Capacity Assessment Tool with TCC Group. As a consultant and academic, Dr. Strasser's consulting work primarily focuses on organizational assessment, program evaluation, capacity building, and research. Most of his nonprofit experience involves working with foundations, education nonprofits, and social service agencies, and he has served as a university faculty member where he has taught courses on nonprofit management, fundraising, community development, and program evaluation. Welcome, Dr. Strasser. Our second speaker this morning is Jay Kahn, Vice President of Advancement at Georgia State University and President of the Georgia State University Foundation. Jay leads the fundraising and engagement operations for the university and works directly with the President and Foundation Board of Trustees as the institution's Chief Development Officer. Prior to joining GSU, Jay was the Executive Senior Associate Vice President for Advancement at Purdue University, where he was responsible for leading the advancement operations for 12 academic and research units, the Office of Industry Partnerships, and the Office of Foundation Relations. While at Purdue, he also provided leadership over the Ever True campaign, a successful effort that raised $2.52 billion against a $2.019 billion goal. And prior to joining Purdue, Jay served in a number of development roles at Ohio University during the Promise Lives campaign, raising $500 million against a $450 million goal. He also holds certified fundraising executive and Six Sigma designations, as well as advanced degrees in business administration and higher education administration. Welcome, Jay. Our third speaker also joins us from our incredible host city, which if you have not been to the Georgia Aquarium and you have time, or you should make time, go. Highly recommend it. But Peggy Still Johnson, she is the Giving and Grants Director for Atlanta Habitat for Humanity, the 7th largest habitat affiliate in the country. She is an alumna of Leadership Atlanta and serves on the board of several organizations, including the U.S. Intellectual Property Alliance, the National Recording Academy, also known as the Grammy Organization, and the Atlanta Film Festival. Her career has spanned from entrepreneur to nonprofit executive, leader, and advocate. She founded a business in the arts in 1988, which she successfully sold in 2011. And in 2012, she worked as a vocal coach and copyist for the musical production Ghost Brothers of Darkland County, created by author Stephen King and musician John Mellencamp. In 2013, Peggy joined Kellenwold Fine Arts Center as executive director, transforming the organization and its programs, and successfully completing a capital campaign, 3 building renovation projects, one of which received an award from the Georgia Trust for Historic Preservation. In February 2020, she joined the Habitat Atlanta team while the world was still in the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic. And like many organizations during this time, Habitat Atlanta faced significant social and economic shifts. But while other organizations were cutting back, Habitat leaned into its mission, investing in growth, finding new operational models. As a result, they are thriving. Today, Peggy will share some perspectives from the front line and reflections from her journey. Welcome, Peggy.
All right, so with that, we are going to turn things over to Dr. Strasser to get us started.
Perfect. So when I originally agreed to do this presentation, they didn't tell me there was going to be a football field of professionals here, but we'll get used to that. So hello to the people in the back. So my name's Dr. Strasser, and I'm going to share a little bit outside of prospect development today to talk a little bit about some larger contextual things happening within philanthropy. So we'll get right to that. So to kind of start us off, I had to do a little history lesson, because what would a presentation by an academic without some history in it be? So nonprofit sector, filling the gap since 1776, and probably before that within the US context. When we look at the nonprofit sector, basically, I'm sharing with you all things you already know, but when the government can't serve something, and when businesses can't make money off of it, that's where the nonprofit sector comes in. And so what you'll see with this wheel of civil society is all the different things we need to kind of make society work. And this is kind of our current state of being on the slides here. We kind of have that going on for us. So, we're working on it. There's some things happening where, you'll see philanthropy is one of the 7 parts of that. And so we play an important role, but some of those other ones are kind of a little iffy. So when we talk about change, I like to tell the story of how I learned how to drive. So I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Indiana originally, and the rules for driving are very similar to the rules of change. And so these are the lessons from my dad. You either lead, you follow, or you get out of the way. And so I feel like the same is sort of happening with leadership within the nonprofit sector. We've seen some really good people leading. We have some donors that are funding that work and following us. And then there's some people that are just kind of needing to move off on the side of the road. So basically, when I talk to nonprofits, I'm here today to talk to you about community leadership. That's what I wrote my dissertation on. We'll talk more about that here in a second. But the number one thing I hear from people is, well, we don't want to make our donors upset. We don't want to take a certain stance on something. We don't want to lose donors. My thing with that is, if that's the first thing that comes to your mind, we don't want to lose donors, you know who's controlling your organization. So it's not your mission that's driving you. It's not maybe the clients. But many people that I've worked with over the years are like, oh, we don't want to upset donors. Hate to break it to you, your mission statement's already kind of a controversial statement. So if your organization's been created around a specific cause or purpose or reason, you have gone beyond neutrality and you have taken a stance, and you're like, this is what I'm here for. I'm here to end homelessness, end hunger, making sure that kids can read at 3rd grade level, making sure they're ready to enter kindergarten, ready to learn. And so really you're looking at no longer being neutral. If your organization was created, you came up with the mission, unless your mission was, we're gonna not really do anything, hang around and maybe do nothing. If you've been paying attention to the news lately, there's a guy in New York that did that with the IRS and 70-some nonprofits that he created that aren't really real, but that's another story for a different day. So my advice to you when it comes to leadership, quit juggling so much. The other piece is you cannot change a systematic or a systemic issue without changing the system. The days of nonprofits just kind of hanging out and be like, well, these are the cards we're dealt with. Let's see if we can win. You got to shuffle the deck a little bit, and that can get uncomfortable. Also, nonprofits can and should advocate and lobby. For many years, we've been told nonprofits can't lobby. That's false. There's whole books on it. My self-appointed adopted Jewish mother, who wrote the book on nonprofit lobbying, is telling me to tell everyone you can lobby. The rules against lobbying are a lot shorter than the rules of things you can and can't do. So that's one piece. And then also, I hate to break it to you, lovely nonprofit professionals, but not everyone's gonna love you, and you have to get over that. It's okay, not everyone's gonna love your mission, not everyone's gonna support you. That's okay. You can't bat 1,000 at all times. And then also, I've mentioned this already, neutrality is a choice now, and it's not a very good one. So with organizations, you have competition, you have other things happening in society, sort of taking a back seat on what is happening in the world is not going to help move things forward. So jump in the driver's seat, take over. Being a backseat driver is not gonna help change the world. And then also, keeping donors is important until it gets in the way of social progress. So like I mentioned, if your number one concern about taking a leadership stance, taking a bold statement is, we don't want to upset our donors, that's the wrong sort of move here. And then radical transparency is a love language. And so the number of times I told donors very transparent hard truths like, hey, something's happening, this might not be the best thing in the world, but we wanted to keep you informed. They're like, okay, cool, great, awesome. Anything else we need to know? I'm like, we need more money? And they're like, okay. So I think radical transparency is a big thing. And then, again, if you find all your time trying to keep your donors while moving your mission forward and it's not working, you need to find some different donors. So with that, let's talk about community leadership. So I spent way too long of my life studying this for my dissertation. I was spending time with a person who wrote one of the most popular books on leadership. She's like, what are you going to write your dissertation on? And I'm like, well, I study community foundations, and I'm in a leadership program, so let's study community leadership. That's an important part. And she's like, well, what's that? I'm like, uh-oh. So I'm like, good question. What do you think it is? She's like, no, that's not going to work here. I'm like, dang. So basically, this is her definition of leadership. I'm like, I'm going to take this and work with it. And she's like, that's fine. So basically, whenever we've talked about community leadership and community leaders for many years, when you think of who you go to get information or who we used to go to, it was a certain population of a community that we would also often label community leaders. It was business leaders, elected officials, rich white men. Those are the people who are like, oh, we got to go talk to our community leaders, see what they think. I'm like, eh. So when we talk about community leadership, I'm talking about any person or organization, so any nonprofit, who engages individuals or groups within a particular community, whether that be geographic, faith community, community identity, to collectively establish goals, that's the important part, guides them towards the achievement of goals, and then to achieve a civic outcome. So this whole phrase around community leadership, what is it? What does it look like? Really pushing it forward to really be something that we're measuring towards. It's not this we're kind of community leaders, we do things that are great. It's really putting some measurement behind that and looking at what do you want to achieve. So this is what I came up with for what community leadership is. It's the blend of 3 different things that you might already know about. So civic leadership is basically leading within a community. When we think about civic leaders making changes within civic life. We have collective leadership, which means working together to achieve something. And then we have community engagement. And community engagement is not the same as attendance. So showing up is not good enough when it comes to community engagement, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But why does this matter to fundraising? I'm going to show you, because community leadership leads to better fundraising results. So buckle in. So for community foundations, they were started in 1914 in Ohio. There's over 1,000 community foundations in the US. 98% of the US is served by a community foundation. And this sort of community leadership model was introduced 75 years later in 1990. And so when you see this 3-legged stool here, community foundations, you probably know, they're fundraisers and they give money away. those are independent. However much money you bring in is how much money you can sometimes give away. This community leadership thing's kind of this, right side thing that, some are better than others at it, and some people are still trying to figure out, well, what does it mean to be a community leader? Oftentimes community foundations in my research would be like, well, we show up to things. I'm like, not the same. Attendance is not leadership. So figuring out what are you pushing forward. Every nonprofit should have a leadership agenda. It doesn't have to be radical, but just something that you stand for. And so it's this thing in the field that has not quite yet been defined, and that's why it took me a really long time to write my dissertation. I'm like, what do you mean by community leadership? And someone's like, well, it's that and that. And so it was, what a journey. So to talk about how it leads to better fundraising results, in my dissertation, I looked at community foundations in California who claimed they did community leadership and those that did not. I looked at their mission statements. So those that claimed community leadership had a higher average annual growth rate of their funding, and they also had a higher unrestricted growth rate, which is like the golden dollar for any organization. So basically, that's one example I have on how community leadership leads to better fundraising results. The qualitative component of that is every organization I talked to, I said, did you piss any donors off on your community leadership journey? And they're like, yep. And I'm like, did any go away? They're like, mm-hmm. I'm like, did you get any more back? They're like, a lot more. So every time they did something radical, some type of community leadership, they got more donors, more people involved. The other outcomes were more people knew about them. They had a better community presence. They were achieving more. And so this whole fear of we're going to make our donors upset and they're going to leave us. I'm like, valid concern. But what they saw is more donors flooded in to support these things that they were looking at doing. So when I talk about community engagement, I talk about it as community-centered engagement. And so this is some research I pulled from when I did research on higher education and community engagement. And so if you're at a university and you do service learning and community engagement, I think the same applies to nonprofits. So if your organization is going to lead some type of community engagement effort, not just showing up, you're actually working to do something, you're co-creating that with the community. You're not parachuting in to save the day with your superhero cape on. No more superheroes. It's also taking an assets-based approach. So there's assets-based approach community development. I say the same thing applies to community engagement, assets-based community engagement. Looking at what's the strength of the community, how can your organization help to lift that up? And there's also a capacity building element. Don't just be there for a short period of time, kind of take what you need to run off and be successful. You also want to make sure that you're building something while you're there. So let me share an example of higher education and how it plays out in fundraising. So there's this thing in higher education called the Carnegie Elective Classification for Community Engagement. It's this really rigorous process that universities have to go through in order to get this designation. Basically they're showing that their faculty is engaged, their students are volunteering. There's just a lot of really good community engagement going on. I worked at some institutions that have the classification and some that don't, and it's very clear at both who had it and who did not. At one institution, I didn't even have to ask. I'm like, nope, we're an R1 Tier 1 research institution. Gotcha. So basically, there are some that have the community engagement classification, but the most important part of that is elective. They don't have to do it. Of universities that are super engaged in your communities, and then others that are like, oh yeah, I forgot they existed. Just being aware of those different things. So I did some research on, well, what did their fundraising look like? So you'll see I pulled 3 years of data, those that had it, those that did not. And this is a boring chart, which basically just shows that all giving is connected. So at a university, and I would assume at any nonprofit, then the grants you bring in is correlated with the individual giving, which is also correlated with alumni giving and corporate giving. So all giving is connected. There's not just one random pot of money that overflows and the other one just kind of simmers there. Boring charts, listen to my voice. So with this chart here, I'm basically showing here all the different levels of giving. Corporate giving, alumni giving, individual giving, and then the other one, because this screen print's too small for me to read, but you can see it. But basically, the circle is the significance, and 0.001 is the highest level of significance one can get. And so statistically significant that these institutions that took it upon themselves to prove that they were community engaged institutions raised money in larger amounts and in more than other institutions that were not engaged with their community. For most of you, that's not going to come as a surprise. But I presented this at an analytics conference for higher education. Everyone's like, what? And I'm like, oh, gosh. So get beyond your numbers. But, and I can assume it's a lot easier when you can tell someone, hey, we do this in the community, and we help our students, we help the community, we help sort of this whole ecosystem that we're involved in. So a couple pieces of advice. Community leadership, you gotta be bold. Read Brene Brown. I'm trying to be the Brene Brown of nonprofits. So her advice here on be bold, you have to have opinions. You gotta take a firm stance in order to push things forward. You got to be brave. You're going to have to face your adversaries. Sometimes that's going to be other nonprofits. Sometimes that's going to be your local city, state, federal government. Other cases, it's going to be your donors. So don't let your donors be your adversary. And also, when you take on a community leadership role, it's not like a 90-degree quick turn. It's like sometimes it's turning a cruise ship. You got to do it slow. Donors are skittish. So sometimes you have to slowly introduce these concepts that you're moving in a new direction. A little donor education can go a long way. Don't just come out with a random new campaign of, we're going to change everything. So slow turns in this car that we're talking about. And then also be courageous. The next phase or battle for social justice is coming. It's actually already here. I live in Texas. It's there. So get ready. Your organization needs to have opinions on things. When it comes to the nonprofit sector, higher education, all places, everything's interconnected. So healthcare connects to education, affordable housing, everything is then connected. So just because, that only affects those nonprofits over there. That's not how it works. That's what we've told ourselves in the past in order to be comfortable with our stance as an organization remaining neutral, which neutrality is a choice, and it's, in my opinion, not a very courageous one. So one of my favorite quotes is, be the change you wish to see in the world. I love Gandhi. I have that poster in my office. I see it every day. My challenge to you is be the leader your community needs. With nonprofit organizations, we lead at a local level oftentimes, and take ownership of your piece of the pie and what you can change in the world, whether it's a city block, whether it's one community, one county, one state, really embracing your role as a nonprofit, your role as an advocate. Again, your mission statement's inherently controversial, so don't lead to make people angry, just because you can. Do it with intention, do it with integrity, and do the work because it's good for your clients. We love our donors, but at the end of the day, a nonprofit exists to change something. And if your donors' views and opinions on the world aren't aligning with that change, it's going to help the people that you created and that the organization was created to serve. It's not in service of the original intent. So again, be the leader your community needs, and that is my talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Strasser. There are so many ways to think about what you shared with us, and a couple of the things that I took away from that. One is that attendance does not equal engagement. I think that has a lot of application in many ways to prospect development, but maybe makes us think a little bit about our role in engaging in change in our organizations. And in our profession, where it depends is kind of our professional motto, your call to be bold and to have an opinion is really compelling. I want to note for everybody that Dr. Strasser will be able to join us and stay for the roundtables after Apra Talks is over. And so if you have any questions or want to come and introduce yourself, he will be available for that. So to introduce our next topic and our next speaker, by show of hands, how many of you have ever thought about the way your organization measures performance, your fundraising metrics, and thought, there's probably a better way to do this? And how many of you have ever heard from your frontline colleagues that it's a little bit minimizing to distill their body of work down into a few key numbers? So if you have raised your hand, then our next talk is going to be right up your alley. Jay is going to lead us in a discussion about thinking differently about fundraising metrics.
Good morning. Well, if you were wondering if you're at a prospect research conference, having a look at someone's regression model with p-values before 10 a.m. is certainly the giveaway. As Rebecca said, my name is Jay Kahn. I'm the Vice President for Advancement at Georgia State University. We're a large R1, 55,000 students. We're across 6 campuses, the largest of which is just downtown Atlanta, about a half mile away. And so if you got here and you realize you love Atlanta, I just put a plug in, we're hiring. So, I would argue that the vast majority of ways that we hold fundraisers accountable to goals in a single finite fiscal year is inherently flawed for a position that I think we all can acknowledge takes at least 3 to 5 years to show that you can do successfully. And so today I'd like to reference some organizational theory that highlights some of these flaws in our organizations, as well as talk about the way that Georgia State addressed some of these by finding alignment between our vision, our values, and our actions. There we go. I feel very fortunate. Georgia State is without a doubt the most mission-oriented institution that I've ever worked at. If you were at Tim Rennick's session on Tuesday morning, you heard a little bit about this. We are a vast majority first generation, 60% Pell eligible, and one of the most diverse institutions in the country. But regardless of that, we have no achievement gaps related to race or socioeconomic background. And that's great for our student success outcomes, but it's created an issue for us that sometimes in advancement in that we've relied on the mission orientation of the institution to retain our people rather than creating a culture and an incentive structure that makes people want to stay within advancement. And there was a lot of transition at the institution a few years ago, both in leadership and advancement and across the university. And we've seen some relatively stagnant fundraising results between 2010 and 2020. So when I think about the challenges that I inherited when I started at Georgia State, I don't think it's drastically different than what a lot of folks in this room deal with on a regular basis. A lot of our fundraising wasn't necessarily tied directly to strategy, and so our results really ebbed and flowed based on large gifts that sometimes we probably weren't even really expecting to come in. Metrics, where we had them, hadn't been touched in a fairly long time, and in my opinion, were tied much more to activity than productivity, and really created this perverse incentive because I think they were used in a really punitive, sort of carrot and a stick way, rather than being used to facilitate a more meaningful management conversation about the best way to go about the work. As I mentioned, we had that turnover, and then when I first started, morale felt pretty low to me. The feedback that I got was that there wasn't a lot of access to leadership, there wasn't a lot of transparency about the vision and the direction of the organization, and so morale was relatively low. So being new and hearing some of this from the staff, naturally I wanted to go and look and see if the data supported some of this feedback. And again, nothing really all that surprising for me. We're getting the majority of our results from a few specific areas. And so for me, it really raised a few questions. One, why aren't we getting the results that we want? And two, where we are having success, is there a way that we can replicate that in other areas of the institution? And so, I'm a little bit of an organizational theory nerd, even though I'm not a doctor. But looking at this Price's Law, right, which states that 50% of your results are going to come from the square root of the number of people doing that work. So if you have 9 fundraisers, 50% of your dollars will come from 3 of them. So naturally, you want to know, is that correct? Who are those people? What are they doing that others aren't? And how do you incentivize that behavior in others across your organization? So when I first started, we had a pretty severe budget cut during the COVID pandemic, but recently we've started talking about what does it look like to add more fundraisers and to scale fundraising production. And so I like this quote about Price's Law from a different perspective as we're thinking about growing our own organization, which is this idea that as organizations grow and scale, confidence begins to outweigh confidence. And I have seen this in fundraising organizations, and I don't think we have any university presence in the room, but if we do, I'll just apologize on the front end, because I see this more often than not in work with academic leadership that maybe isn't as close to the work that we do, right? If you're raising X, oh, we'll just add 10 more fundraisers and you'll be raising Y, right? It's easy, it's a volume issue. Now, everyone in this room knows that that's not the case, but it's still the reality of our situation. And so I believe strongly that when you start to scale your organization, if you're gonna grow, competence, culture, and vision have to go along with that growth. So I went back into our data at Georgia State to see if Price's Law was accurate. And so going back to fiscal year 16, we didn't have a single year where Price's Law didn't hold true for us. Now, our average time in position at Georgia State is actually quite strong at 5.8 years. And so I would have assumed we'll see the same people being top performers year over year. But that wasn't the case. So over these last 6 fiscal years, those 4 to 6 people were actually 15 different fundraisers. So we can see that Price's Law is largely applicable to the major gift work, at least at Georgia State. And while there is some consistency in top performers, they're not the same people year over year. And even when people have repeated that top performance, they generally don't do so for more than 2 to 3 years. So I think we can agree, right, that our work is pretty cyclical. Yet at the same time, we continue to emphasize a culture that focuses on a really finite period of time, even though our data shows that success really happens over many years. So I think financial metrics will always have a place in our work. They're not going to go away, right? But they need to have a focus on competency and an alignment with organizational values to show that how you do the work is as important as a single fiscal year, because if we don't emphasize that culture, our best performers will leave. And we saw it at Georgia State. The 15 top performers since fiscal year 16, less than half of them are still with our organization. So another way to think about this, again, when you're scaling organizations, is this idea of the Ringelmann effect, which is as your organization grows and the focus is more on size and growth and less on competence and culture, goals become murkier, responsibilities are unclear, and the larger group loses connection to that central mission and culture. So talked a little bit about culture here, and I think it's important to acknowledge what culture is and what it isn't. So you had a manager once that used to say, all culture is reinforced behavior. Now that's probably true in some sense, but I also think it's an oversimplification. And so, we like to look at it, and this is how we talk about it internally, that culture is, thinking about what the personal values of your staff are, what the espoused values of your organization are, and then where those two things intersect with the actual action of the organization, because I think we also know that sometimes the espoused values of the organization and what actually happens aren't really that closely aligned. So knowing this in application led to some interesting questions at Georgia State about how we create this value alignment to drive performance, hold people accountable, and create a culture around coaching and improvement rather than that punitive metrics type environment that I talked about earlier. Sorry, I was told the clicker was foolproof and I've messed it up 3 times. So. And I think the most important thing on the onset of this is to acknowledge that success is really going to vary from year to year, and different people are going to be successful in varying years. And so it's okay to sort of say every year is not going to be a home run. And if you've read James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, this idea of the 3 stages of failure might be familiar to you. And so I think the most important thing to acknowledge, and something that I feel really strongly about, is that if something's not going well, more often than not, it's probably on the leadership of the organization and the constructs that they've set up organizationally, and less so on the performance of the individual contributor. And I really do believe that strongly. And so I think this idea of tactics, strategy, and vision are a helpful way to illustrate Georgia State's path forward. So when you think about tactics, I'm talking about how mistakes, and we certainly, again, had not gotten the how right at Georgia State. We weren't really clear on how we were measuring performance, how we were qualifying someone as successful, how we were setting the vision, and our metrics just didn't reflect what we were being asked of the people in certain roles. Similarly with strategy, we're talking about what mistakes. So I'm sure a lot of folks in the room know that Peter Drucker adage of what gets measured gets improved. But as prospect development folks, you also know it gets manipulated. And so the metrics that we had were much more focused on activity, right? Contacts, visits, and not about what I would consider to be the proper what, which is advancing donor relationships and closing gifts. And then finally, vision. So when your failure of vision is a why mistake, right? And as I said earlier, we hadn't really created a compelling vision for advancement at Georgia State and rather had relied more on the mission of the institution, which is compelling. But our organization didn't have a lot of conversations around values and competencies and some of these things that we believe will lead to longer term success. So ultimately the question is, what do we do? And again, I think for me and for our leadership team, it was important that we took complete responsibility for what the next outcomes were going to be, but also to make a really strong effort to get buy-in across the organization. So we brought in an outside consultant that helped us create a vision statement for our organization, and then subsequently worked with all of our business units across advancement to develop their vision statements that rolled up to the larger goals. And each of these business plans had strategies tied to 3 to 5 goals. And these were living documents. We took them across the organization, got feedback and buy-in across everyone in advancement. And so this may seem pretty straightforward, but for us, it was a pretty radical departure from the sort of top-down culture that had existed previously. So, and then moving to strategy, again, we put together working groups to address a lot of issues across the organization, from competencies and metrics, really thinking about employee retention, so a lot of talent development functions, and looking at our processes and procedures from how we did annual evaluations all the way to our gift acceptance and naming policies. And then focusing on the how, really looking at the fundamental disconnect that we had identified between the values of the organization and what the actions were actually occurring. And so we moved to systems and processes that better reflected that feedback. And you can see some of them here, and I'll highlight a couple specific examples. So I realize this is probably tough to see, especially in the back, but so for our metrics, right, one of the things that we heard was that we had this one-size-fits-all approach to all of the fundraisers, and it wasn't reflective of the actual opportunity at the organization. And so we moved to a weighted scorecard. These goals are set collaboratively every single year between the fundraiser, the manager, the dean, and our prospect development team. And they're much more focused on time and position, what the opportunity in that position is, what your portfolio looks like, et cetera. So for example, if you're new in your role, your metrics are going to be much more focused on portfolio engagement and qualification work with a really meaningful conversation about here's what your role is going to look like over the next 3 to 5 years and how you're going to build that into focusing more on proposals and dollars. Simultaneously, the working groups developed a set of competencies and values. And so, right, really acknowledging how you do the work is as important as the outcomes. And so this is part of our annual evaluation process. And at the end of every fiscal year, you end up on a 9-box grid. So you move up and down in the grid based on your metrics, but you move left to right based on those values and competencies. And so this facilitates some really interesting management conversations, as you can imagine. And so I'm sure we all have those colleagues that raise a ton of money, but they're not donor-centric. They're not good partners to their deans. They run ruckshot over their colleagues. If that's you, you're not going to succeed at Georgia State, and there's not a path forward for you. And we have those conversations. And simultaneously, if the metrics just aren't where you want them to be in a given year, but you're doing the things that we say we value and that we believe will lead to success, we'll absolutely find a path forward for you in the organization. So I highlighted a number of things on the previous slide that we did, but in the interest of time, I'll highlight one, which is job pathing. So some of the feedback that we got was that it's not really clear how you move up in the organization or what your next role can be beyond moving into management, which I'm sure everyone in this room can acknowledge is not for everyone, right? And so starting with the frontline fundraisers, but now anyone that has metrics tied to their position can be part of this program. And so we did a number of things, but really allows you to be intentional about finding a path for people in the organization. So when somebody new starts, let's say in a frontline fundraising role, we say, here's what the expectations are. If you meet these things over the next few years, here's what your next promotion is going to be and what your new salary is going to be, and we take a lot of the guesswork out of it. It's early for us, but I do believe it's helping with retention. And we did incumbent reviews of our existing staff at the leadership team level, and again, really honest and direct conversation that I think is consistent with our core values. We also put people on professional development plans anytime that they show an interest in moving up in the organization. So rather than waiting for a performance issue and having to do a performance improvement plan, we're much more proactive about it. It's tied to the competencies and helps people understand what growth in the organization is going to look like and how to be successful. So I do want to say that our prospect development team was invaluable during this process, right? The way we use and access and implement data would not have been possible without Rachel Brown and her team. And I'm sure Rachel's in here, but I won't call her out because she's already probably mad at me. But and my hope is, as the prospect development and fundraising teams continue to work together, that relationship evolves as a peer-to-peer relationship, right? Because they're key in holding our fundraisers accountable, not just to the metrics, but the way that they approach their work. Well, I had a closing thing. So, in closing, I just want to say I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I know it's been 3 years since you all were together, so I'm sure it's been fun, and I hope you leave energized and with some fresh ideas. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Jay. That was so fascinating. And before our next speaker, I just want to highlight, some of the things I think I took away. First, to come in and, we talked a little bit before the presentation, right at the start of a pandemic, hired in, coming to tackle some of these major issues. When you mentioned we have done it the same way all of the time, so to come in and want to be that change is amazing. We've talked a lot about uncommon connections, but I liked the presentation in that it's uncommon ways to solve problems in the workplace and to move change and to make that happen. And what I like about this approach, I love a good data chart, absolutely. So you got me there. However, it is when you are trying to change an organization that data is so important. And I know that, as keepers of that data, we sometimes feel a little protective of it, but then we can realize, when we can pass it along to our staff, look at all of the changes that we could make and look at the story we can tell. So that combined, and so, when you gave the shout out to the data and prospect research team, it's a collaborative effort that we all have to remember to make really, really great progress is that. And the only other thing I want to touch on too, I presented to the executive leadership cohort on Tuesday, I think it was, about leadership. And it really starts with the manager. It really starts with leadership. It comes down. I asked the group, think of the worst position or worst job you've ever had. It probably starts with it's because of the manager or leadership. But to institute really great change and to convince the leaders to embrace it, you need the data and facts to help support these kinds of initiatives and advocate for yourself. So, wonderful presentation, yes. And as we talk about change and being uncommon, I do want to, set up for Peggy. Like many organizations during this time, Habitat Atlanta faced significant social and economic shifts. When other organizations were cutting back, though, Habitat Atlanta leaned into its mission, investing in growth and finding new operational models, and as a result, they are thriving. So I'm gonna hand things over to Peggy, who's gonna share some perspectives from the front line and her journey of joining Habitat Atlanta in the midst of the pandemic. So Peggy.
Thank you so much. And first of all, I want to say welcome to Atlanta. We're so glad that you're here. I grew up in San Diego and I moved here 36 years ago and have loved it here. And I consider myself a Georgian now. So welcome to our wonderful city. Give it a chance. It's not usually this hot. It's usually much cooler. I wanted to really highlight my story and our what we've been through the last few years since the pandemic at Atlanta Habitat. So I started off with this quote, I am who I am today because of the choices I made yesterday. So as mentioned, my name is Peggy Steele Johnson, and I am a professional fundraiser. My background is in the arts. I founded a music company in 1988 and successfully sold the business 24 years later. From there, I kept my entertainment production and coaching company and worked on or with films such as Curious Case of Benjamin Button, Parental Guidance, Bessie, some independent films, and worked with the author Stephen King and musician John Mellencamp and producer T-Bone Burnett. From there, a friend of mine who works with Elton John called me about an opportunity to become an executive director at a fairly large fine arts center. Other than serving on some nonprofit boards, I didn't know much about fundraising or running a large nonprofit. I did know, however, how to run and grow a successful business. My friend said this fine arts center was tired and the board was looking for someone to take the center to another level, and that we did. Within 5 years, we accomplished the board's list of goals, which included a capital campaign and large renovation project, which should have taken 10 years to complete. This began my love for fundraising. I had some great coaches, and they encouraged me to find my voice, to find my strength, and to ask for help from my network. I was advised to read books like Good to Great and The 7 Faces of Philanthropy. These readings included fascinating concepts to me, and with much study, helped me transition from for-profit to nonprofit. I loved what Collins teaches in his Good to Great book. Determine what you can be best in the world at and what you cannot be best in the world at. Determine what drives your economic engine. Determine what you are deeply passionate about. I tried to think of how I could make a difference with the skills I have and the people I know. To run a successful company for 24 years, I had learned how to sell the brand and encourage people to trust and to believe in me. This was a strength that would help me in fundraising and in leadership. I recruited my friends in the entertainment business, which was not really common, that were Grammy winners and celebrities like CeeLo Green, members of the Zac Brown Band, Mickey Thomas of Starship, and local celebrity talent who were friends and willing to support the arts. We literally created beautiful fundraising events that were incredible with music and art. It felt as though we had brought Camelot to Atlanta. This, along with an excellent development and strategic plan, helped us reach our fundraising and mission goals. One of my strengths, I would say, is resilience and tenacity. I was fearless. I love the arts, and I wanted to help this community thrive. Like my company I sold, running this nonprofit was an experience I cherish. It was hard, and after 5 years of 60 to 80-hour work weeks, I was ready and needed to spend more time with my family. I felt 29 years was enough time spent running a business and an organization. I then contemplated which part of the job I enjoyed the most. I realized it was fundraising and revenue generation. So I became a consultant, advising and working with many different organizations. This brought me to Atlanta Habitat for Humanity as a consultant, and today I am their giving and grants director. I love being able to tell the story of impactful work, meeting amazing people. I love moves management. I love to geek out with charts and metrics, and of course, love being part of a team, helping those in need and those who are marginalized. I feel I am helping make a difference. This is my story. I had unique strengths, my skills, and my interesting network, and incorporated all of this into my work in a nonprofit. Recently, I was able to call a friend who works at Tyler Perry Studios, and he and the leadership of Tyler Perry Studios were able to attend a house dedication for Atlanta Habitat for a wonderful homeowner who is a huge fan of Tyler Perry films. This homeowner teaches special needs children, and is the first in her family to own her own home. What a thrill to do this for her. We all have our own unique strengths, skills, and network. And that is what we bring to our work in fundraising and to our community. I see today that everyone I know is a potential donor or volunteer. Through the years, I've learned much about research and data collection. I am blessed to be part of the team at Atlanta Habitat for Humanity. I will now focus on what we have done since 2020, the year the pandemic started, and as an organization, how we have focused on our strengths, skills, and network to soar in spite of the effects of the pandemic. Who are we and what do we do? Atlanta Habitat for Humanity transforms low-income and socially vulnerable communities, marginalized communities, and communities of color by acting as a catalyst for neighborhood revitalization through education, innovative development, partnerships, and long-term relationships with families. As Habitat for Humanity's International's largest affiliate in the state of Georgia and the 7th largest affiliate in the world, Atlanta Habitat collaborates and creates community partnerships, providing support for disproportionately impacted communities with residential counseling programs to educate and increase economic investment. We facilitate transformative, sustainable neighborhood revitalization for social mobility and generational wealth building. Our work encompasses supporting families and military veterans in Atlanta and in South Fulton for those in need, earning 30 to 50% AMI. Despite the pandemic, Atlanta Habitat continues its work to build capacity in 2 areas of greatest impact: people and neighborhoods. Our vision is an Atlanta where all people have access to quality, affordable housing in safe, vibrant neighborhoods with opportunities to thrive. Through investment in new home builds, critical home improvements, education, and entrepreneurship opportunities, we bolster our homeowners' financial sustainability and wealth building for future generations. Today, despite the pandemic, we have an overall goal we must achieve of serving nearly 1,500 families annually in over 168 neighborhoods. This was the narrative that we used that helped us get the award for $1 million from the state of Georgia this year. We are the only Habitat affiliate or housing organization in Georgia to receive the Negative Economic Impact Grant for the Fiscal Recovery Funding Opportunity. At Atlanta Habitat, we know our numbers. We have an amazing team and data analysts who help me in my role with numbers, charts, maps, demographics, etc. Having all of this information stored in Salesforce has truly been a game changer for me as a fundraiser. I'll be mentioning some of the applications we use and companies we work with in fundraising. I'm not getting paid to mention these companies, and you may have your favorite applications and partners that you work with. I'm simply mentioning because this is working for us today at Atlanta Habitat. I had used Salesforce before in other organizations, but having a solid team utilizing Salesforce in every aspect of the mission, synced with other applications, has made all of the difference. Research and knowing your numbers, as you know, is incredibly important in our work. Funders and donors want and need to know what they are funding and whether their dollars are literally making a difference. As mentioned, I was recruited to come to Atlanta Habitat at the beginning of 2020, first as a consultant helping with grants and some giving. Those that came before me were paper people. There were files and files of paperwork in file cabinets and all over the office. The CEO had the foresight to bring me in to organize the grants and giving. And then came COVID-19. Like everyone else, we had no choice but to work from home. But everything was at the office. This forced us to move everything online. I spent months scanning all of the documents and uploading them to SharePoint. I worked with our data analysts and our Salesforce database coordinator, organizing the hundreds of grant accounts in Salesforce. We took the paper grant calendar of who to apply to and when and for what and put them all in Salesforce. I observed the culture of how Atlanta Habitat was run. I asked lots of questions and discovered which fundraising had worked and who our major donors and funders were. We had very successful sponsorship and individual donor program. We also had a number of successful galas. Due to the pandemic, we had to figure out quickly how to help our families in need who were struggling to pay their mortgages. We tripled our grant fundraising during 2020. We received PPP funding. We canceled our gala and somehow managed to still build and repair homes and work with hundreds of families in financial literacy and career counseling and homeownership classes. Not one employee was let go. Everyone was able to keep working. We finished a $15 million capital campaign and built and opened a new restore in South Fulton during the pandemic as well. We broke ground in 2020 to build the largest affordable housing development in Atlanta known as Browns Mill Village. We have grown funding for education, and through amazing supporters like Clark Howard and the Home Depot Foundation, to name a few, and our annual supporters, we have weathered the COVID storm. New ideas, lots of technology, and changes in the way we build and repair homes helped us help our families in need. We raised over $750,000 in mortgage relief and started our new Home Matters program, helping our families suffer from unforeseen crisis, helping them to stay in their homes. We knew our numbers. We knew what had worked before and what needed to be changed, and we were willing to make changes. In 2021, we began working a flex work week and have maintained that still today, meaning working some days from home and some in the office. We raised just as much in grant funding in 2021 as we did in 2020, which was triple the amount we raised for grants in 2019. In 2021, we also embarked on growing various revenue streams like adding Donate Stock as a partner to help with stock giving. We held our first virtual build, which we called And Still We Build campaign, encouraging our volunteers to donate because we couldn't build in person due to COVID restrictions. We raised enough to build a home thanks to the donations and the giving match from Clark Howard. We knew we wanted to grow our annual giving as well. By now, I was full-time at Atlanta Habitat as the Giving and Grants Director and feeling blessed to be working with such a fine team led by our new Chief Development Officer, Rosalind Merrick. Rosalind really focused on the numbers to tell the story of what we raised in 2019 and 2020 and what could be possible in 2021, especially Q4. The CEO, Lisa Gordon, had given permission for Rosalind to grow the resource development team in 2021. Drew McGuffin was promoted to be our Development Systems and Special Projects Director. You may wonder, what is that? Drew makes sure our systems run well, including Salesforce, and that the reports are accurate and align with our finance department's reports. I had never seen that done. He can supply the numbers of what we have raised in every quarter and from whom. We were able to predict and forecast how much and from whom we would naturally raise in 2021 and who we needed to reach out to. We have over 60,000 stakeholders in our database. Having good and accurate records is incredible value in forecasting. Drew helped us get up and running with Classy, another application for our campaigns, and synced our Classy campaigns with our Salesforce database. This streamlined all of our online giving acknowledgments, making it much easier to keep up with the donor stewardship as well. We more than doubled our giving in 2021 for Giving Tuesday, and then tripled our goal for the end of year appeal, both using Classy for our campaigns. We used Power Hour giving matches donated from amazing board members, and our communications team helped us with social media and e-blasts. From there, we sent letters, made calls, which led to great momentum and buzz. Our major donors gave more in 2021 than in 2020. Our tagline was, "Give the gift of home." And we surpassed our goal for all of our fundraising in 2021. We were bold because we had the numbers and because we knew the numbers could tell us what was possible. In 2022, we started the year by planning ahead. As Jim Collins states in his book, Good to Great, momentum is really important. It is hard to get started, but like a flywheel, once you get some momentum, you will begin to pick up speed quickly. We knew 2022 was going to be a big year, and we started planning in January. Stewardship was something we needed and wanted to really focus on in 2022, thanking our loyal donors and stakeholders. We planned our calendar to finally host a volunteer appreciation reception and then a donor appreciation reception in third quarter. Our volunteer appreciation reception is actually this Sunday. This will be our first event since the pandemic of 2020. We knew and we know we need more help to grow. We began to work on capacity building and processes within our stewardship communications. We sent out thousands of special thank you cards and gifts to our major donors. Clark Howard, one of our biggest donors, also helped us with autographed books we could give to our very highest donors. We aligned our branding with our fundraising and used online press and social media to bring attention to our accomplishments, to thank our supporters and highlight our participants. We also started looking at growing our planned giving in 2022 and are excited to be working with FreeWill. August is Make a Will Month, and we are launching our new Legacy Society. We were pleased to find out something we didn't know, that we already had a number of donors who named us in their wills through the use of FreeWill. One of those donors is giving us $650,000. We began thinking how we might celebrate our 40th anniversary in 2023. With the success of our beautiful and affordable housing development, Browns Mill Village, building affordable housing for 134 families, we, along with other affiliates of Habitat for Humanity, received the largest collective gift from Mackenzie Scott. Her team phoned us personally, asking a lot of questions, and then awarded Atlanta Habitat for Humanity $13.5 million, with the funds coming directly from Mackenzie Scott to us. Mackenzie Scott gifted over $436 million to 83 of the 1,200 U.S. Habitat for Humanity affiliates. For Atlanta Habitat, the funds from Mackenzie Scott will help us to duplicate what we have done at Browns Mill Village, along with the capacity building we will need to grow our work. Though this gift and all the successful fundraising I have mentioned is amazing, the demand is far greater than the supply in Atlanta and in the country. We are in a housing crisis, and we need to continue our momentum to help families in need. These families are those that work as teachers, bus drivers, police officers, firefighters, healthcare workers, retail workers, and more. Benjamin Franklin said, failing to plan is planning to fail. I worked at a couple of organizations that failed to plan. I was sent in to save the organizations. It was too late. We must always look to the future. Strategic planning is critical, and being flexible is a must. Saying this is working and this is the way we have always done it are some of the worst phrases an organization can say. We need to watch the trends, embrace technology, and new practices. We have found that we can reach more families in our education programs by using technology. We can fundraise through technology. Our staff meetings are hybrid, so you can attend in person or via Zoom or Teams. That way the work continues, never letting COVID or any crisis beyond our control become a threat to our operations. Know your donors and funders. They are all unique. Each one is important, whether they give $25 or $25,000. Incorporate moves management, fundraising each to become a loyal supporter of your work. During the pandemic, we created and updated our giving and stewardship plan. This year, we created a fundraising recruitment plan, which incorporates a communications plan. We have updated the look of our annual report, newsletters, and all of our marketing. We have moved to online distribution of our newsletters with a fundraising component for them all. We are looking at updating our website as well. Having a brand director is very important, making sure our branding is correct, consistent, beautiful, and professional. All of our communications is with our donors, funders, and stakeholders in mind. We know that we can't rely on only our large funders, and that we must continue to cultivate new funding sources and donors. This year, we are excited to announce our new recurring giving program, which we are calling our Foundation Society, which is part of our moves management in creating a base of new donors who can give in a way that works for them financially now. I truly believe that developing a good recurring giving program and planned giving program is vital for sustainability of all organizations. Our CDO, Rosalind Merrick, is bold and one of the kindest people I know. She is not afraid to ask donors or funders to increase their support. The fundraising message, as you know, is the same for all. However, we tailor each to each donor. It is important to find out what their goals are and what they want to achieve with their giving. Why are they giving, and what is their capacity in giving? We also use iWave, I know they're here, which helps us to know approximately the capacity individuals can give or their history of giving. Because of Rosalind's encouragement, we have a sponsor that went from an annual sponsorship of $100,000 to tripling their gift to $300,000 this year. This was because our CDO challenged her team to ask for more. This led to many more asks and many more gifts. It all starts with the ask and how you ask. So I leave you with, in your pitch, your letters, your communications, and in your narratives, get to the point. Thomas Jefferson said, the most valuable of all talents is that of never using two words when one will do. Most of your donors, funders, stakeholders are very busy. They want to read quickly and have the facts laid out so they know what they are funding. A wonderful fundraising mentor of mine is Linda McNay of Our Fundraising Search. She helped me with my first capital campaign. She taught me that there are 3 little words you need to know, and that is all you need to know when asking for money, or really asking for anything. Would you consider? Would you consider giving $25 per month? Would you consider giving $2,500? Would you consider giving $10,000? Would you consider us in your planned giving? Would you consider going to a different restaurant? Would you consider doing the dishes? Would you consider? Keep your eye on the goal. What are you trying to do? All the dots must connect, and every detail is important to tell the story, which needs to be backed up by metrics of success and demographics. That's where you all come in. Find ways to grow capacity and get organized so you can see where you are headed today, next year, and within 5 years. No does not mean never. I have a cute little story to share. I called up a restaurant because I heard that they had good and healthy wraps, and I needed food donated for an event I was hosting. So I called Richard Thomas of Our Thomas Restaurant. He was grumpy and not interested in helping me, and I talked him into coming out to take a tour of our facility. After the tour, showing him who we are and what we do, his heart was changed, and he became one of our biggest fans and brought us food personally for years that we could sell in our cafe and at our events. This sweet man was the founder of Bojangles. And when he passed away, his family asked if he could have his memorial at our center. I will always cherish that relationship, and am so glad no didn't mean never. I had no idea who he was when I called this little restaurant and asked him for wraps. As Taylor Swift says, being fearless isn't being 100% not fearful. It's being terrified. But you jump anyway. May we all be fearless. May we all start and continue our momentum. May we all be open to new ideas and better ways of doing things. May we do our research, and may we all continue our work helping those in need and making our world a better place for all. Thank you.
Peggy, thank you so much. I think your talk right there just kind of perfectly brought the threads of today's conversation together, which for me are that when change comes, confront it, embrace it, shape it, don't be afraid of it. And in order to do that, you have to know who you are, you have to know your strengths, you have to know your organization, you have to get organized, get a little structure, understand the context that you're working in, and adapt when you need to. And I think something that you talked about a lot, Peggy, was the power of network and the power of community. And I think that that's something that we've learned absolutely over the last couple of years, is the importance and the value of community. The importance of having people around you who both support you and challenge you, where you are not only safe, but you are celebrated to be who you are. And that is the most wonderful thing, I think, about the Apra community for me. This conference and all of the ways that we work together over the course of the year after this conference, this is a pretty spectacular community to be a part of.
Now we are going to go with Q&A for a few minutes. There is in the app a link to Slido where you can put in your questions. I did peek a second ago at the ones came in, and I think it was a request for some slides, which absolutely we will get those to you. And so I am going to pull it up, and you have it as well. Type those in. It looks like only so far the slides in, but if you did have a couple questions, we can take them for any of our, put them on the spot. So we'll continue to monitor those. Type quickly.
I'll also share a couple of the comments that were
Yeah,
shared
please,
from the
yes.
audience. Can Jay Kahn's talk be required listening for every VP of Advancement and University President in Higher Education today?
Right?
Yes. I'll add real quick that for my presentation. There's some little small business card size things with this blinding light. It's like that drink table over there. It's just a QR code to a report that relates to the community leadership framework I shared. So there's about 100 of the little cards over there, so please take them.
And I'll say I can't even get my own president to listen to it, so good luck.
Change is a process. It takes time.
I don't know if
Do we not have any questions? It's
They
very
just-
unusual.
you're ready to network, aren't you? You're ready to start talking to your buddies. I know it.
All right.
Yep.
Well,
Let's
can we
transition.
say thank you again to our speakers? We really appreciate your time. We're so grateful for you.